Today I'm changing the brake discs and pads on this Seat Ibiza 6J. So stay tuned and let me show you how. Safety first. Raise the front of the car and support it on axle stands with the front wheels off, handbrake firmly on and a rear wheel chocked. In common with most cars, the Ibiza has a disc retaining screw that holds the disc to the hub. It needs a T30 Torx. So first thing, undo that screw. It shouldn't be tight. It should come out easily, and hopefully nobody has chewed the Torx head up for you. If you do find that it's tight and that the hub starts turning when you're trying to undo it, put a couple of wheel studs back in, just a few turns, and use your breaker bar or some other similar bar to stop the hub from turning. With the key in the ignition so that the steering column is unlocked, turn the steering wheel fully towards the direction on the side that you're working on. Remove the key from the ignition and allow the steering column to lock. Remove the cap from the bleed nipple and the caps from the slide pin rubber protectors. And with an 11mm socket or ring spanner, make sure that the bleed nipple is free to be undone and then just nip it back down. Release the spring clip that holds the hose to the suspension leg. Release the hose from the other bracket, push backwards slightly and out of the bracket. That gives you more latitude with the hose. Then fit a brake hose clamp to the hose, but somewhere out of the way. With your 11mm spanner on the bleed nipple, put a bleed hose into a jar and onto the bleed nipple itself. Open the bleed nipple about half a turn. Gently place a large flat blade between the back of the worn brake pad and the piston, and very gently push the piston back into the caliper, moving the blade into the increased gap as you go. You'll have to go in at a slight angle to avoid the clips that are on the back of the pad. Push the piston all the way in and then return the nipple to a closed position. You can now release your tube from the bleed nipple, drain your tube into your jar. Starting with the bottom one, using your 7mm hex, undo both guide pins. If you've got a 7mm hex that you can put on a ratchet, it makes life a lot easier. And lift the caliper away. At this point you can remove the inner and outer brake pads because they're both attached to the caliper, and then hang the caliper from the spring with a hook or tie it with string so that it does not hang on its hose. Somebody at VW has clearly thought about serviceability. The arms here are straight, which enables the disc to come off with no further disassembly. If you're really lucky, the disc may well just fall off, but the chances are it's going to need some persuasion. If you've got a little platform of some description that you can support the caliper on, great, but you can support it up here. Just be very, very, very careful of this ABS sensor. And take out the slide pins. Spray a little brake cleaner into the slide pin rubbers, and with a nylon brush, give the inside a clean out. Flush any residue out. Let the excess brake fluid drip away and then leave it to dry. And while that's drying, with some brake cleaner and a wire brush, clean up the slide pins and the threads. Don't do this on top of tarmac, by the way. Brake cleaner dissolves tarmacadam. Give your caliper a degrease and a clean down with brake fluid and your brush, particularly on the surfaces that contact the pads. Make sure to have a tray or plenty of newspaper under where you're working. Give the face of the piston seal and the piston itself a quick clean as well, and do the same with the surfaces that the brake pads run on the carrier, and allow it to dry thoroughly. Give the disc mounting face a good wire brush cleaning, particularly around the radius there where the disc sits. Do that all round. Give it a wash down to get the dust off with brake cleaner. Allow it to dry off, and then put a smear of Ceratec over the radius and the mounting face. Just a little blob. 2 little blobs like that will spread out across the whole face just nicely. New discs come with an anti-corrosion coating which must be cleaned off before they're fitted. So a little brake cleaner and a freshly laundered microfiber cloth. Also a quick once over on the mounting face that goes against the hub. Making sure to line up the retaining screw holes. Mount the disc to the hub and put the retaining screw back. Nip it down with your T30 Torx. Not tight, just nip it down. Apply a smear of Ceratec to the piston face and to the other side where the other pad locates. Apply a smear of Ceratec to the slide pins and put them back in place in the caliper. Make sure that they move freely in and out, and then place them so that the end of the threads is just level there. Now be careful not to touch the braking surface, and depending on what sort of pads you've got, you may be lucky. One of them may well be marked as piston side, like these Pagid pads are. The outer pad is easiest to fit by pushing downwards. Just a tiny smear of Ceratec just where the pads run on the carrier, and making sure not to twist this hose. The caliper goes back on. Put the pads over the disc and then drop the caliper onto the carrier at the bottom, such that the carrier slots between that little leg and the leg of the pad, and push up into place. If you push the pin through its rubber, you should be able to see the hole that it goes into. Make sure it locates in its hole and start to screw it in. Then do the bottom one. You may need to look up under here to get it to locate into its hole. Hand tight with a fairly short bar, 30 Newton meters I think is the correct spec. You can now remove the brake hose clamp and return the hose to position. Slot the hose in there, push through, and then on with the clip, which you might have to give a little tap to get it into position. Return your bleed nipple cap and the slide pin caps to position. Those are very important because they keep dirt and water out. From the driver's seat, pump the brake pedal until it goes hard to seat the pads and the caliper. These new pads start off with 14mm thickness of braking material, and the minimum safe thickness of friction material is 3mm. I'll link to it up above. I have done a video that explains why 3mm. All that remains now is to put your wheels back on and drop your car back on the ground. Go for a short test drive. Brake gently. You should run new brake pads and discs in with gentle braking for about the first 200 miles. You can damage discs and pads by harsh braking when they're brand new. And don't forget to check and top up your brake fluid level. If you got value from this video, please give it a like down by the title, and I shall see you next time.